Okay, so we're going to learn to solve quadratic equation by another method called completing the square. So before we actually learn the method, I want to make sure that we are kind of aware of one of the patterns that we will be looking at in this particular method. It's basically a perfect square trinomial, but basically if you are told to do a plus b square, what is the pattern that you will get when you do a plus b square? So we know a plus b square is nothing but a plus b multiplied by a plus b. Yes, which you can basically FOIL or do the box method or do any method, and what will you get? You will get a times a is a square, and then the middle term is, there are two middle like terms which you will add to each other. It's ab plus ba, which is same as ab, so it's basically 2ab, and the last term is going to be b times b is b square. So always whenever you have two terms, a plus b, a binomial basically, whenever you have a binomial square, you will always land up with a trinomial which is of this form, and this trinomial is called as a perfect square trinomial. The reason it's called as a perfect square trinomial is because it is the square of a binomial. It is a square of a binomial. And the same thing can be applied for a minus b square. So a minus b square will have the same pattern as this, the result of this, a square. The last one will still be plus b square, but the middle term, because this is negative, will be negative 2ab plus b square. Always. I'm so sorry, you couldn't see that. So basically a minus b square equals a square minus 2ab plus b square. Same pattern as this perfect square trinomial. So we're going to take down a little bit of notes on this. X square minus 8x plus 16 is called as a perfect square trinomial. Why trinomial? Because it's got three terms, x square, 8x, 16. And perfect square because it can be rewritten as a binomial squared. You can factor it as a binomial squared. So basically x minus 4 squared. So basically what we are saying is x minus 4, they already write the square. So basically what we are saying is x square minus 8x plus 16 is equal to, this is a perfect square trinomial, is equal to x minus 4 squared. When you do x minus 4 multiplied by x minus 4, you will get x square minus 8x plus 16, and they are the same as each other. For now, just absorb this information, and you'll be wondering why you're learning this. You just need to know this pattern for one of the steps when we do completing the square. Okay, so completing the square is a method that is very useful to use when you are told to solve a quadratic equation which is not factorable, But even an equation that can be factored, you can use completing the square. So completing the square, like quadratic formula, so completing the square actually replaces using the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation. I personally feel it's a little better way to do than quadratic formula, because you don't have to remember a formula, and quadratic formula has a lot of arithmetic operations going on, square rooting, dividing, and all of that. You will kind of bypass all of that. Here you just have to, as long as you remember a few steps to do, this will be a method that you will start feeling more comfortable with. So your goal is to solve for x. And normally when you're given a quadratic equation, you're told to solve for x, what comes to your mind is, can I factor it? We will still try to factor it. If you cannot factor, then maybe you can try to use the completing the square. You can use quadratic formula or completing the square, but we are going to learn how to use completing the square. So let's look at the first one. Solve x squared plus 10x plus 24 equals to 0. First of all, let's look at this. If you were told to solve, can you factor this? Yes, we can, because factors of 24 that add up to 10, 6 and 4. So that means my solutions, when I actually write the solutions, will be negative 6 and negative 4. But we are not learning to factor, we are learning to do completing the square. So let's do the same thing with completing the square. So what are the steps here? So step number 1 in completing the square is move the constant to the other side. What does that mean? That means you take the 24 and move it to the other side. So your first step, step number 1, is going to be x squared plus 10x. Move the 24 to the other side, it becomes negative 24. That's your step number 1. Okay, once you do that, what are you going to do next? So step 2 is sort of crucial. It's kind of a new thing. You take the b. We all know what b is. B is the coefficient of x. Take b, divide by 2, and then square it. So basically you're doing b by 2 squared. That's what you're doing in step 2. You're doing b by 2 squared. So step number 2 in this case is going to be b is 10 divided by 2 squared. What is that? 10 by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. But what are you going to do with this 25? There's no space here, so I'm going to continue this here. So what are you going to do with this 25? So that's where you do step number 3. That's where you do step number 3. Step number 3 is add this number that you found to both sides. Add this to both the sides. So step number 3, you have 25. You're going to add 25 to the equation which is in step 1. So x squared plus 10x plus 25 minus 24 plus 25. So is it sort of clear? You're adding this to both the sides. So that's what I've done here. So let me go ahead and so adding this to both the sides. So there's 25 here. You've added 25 to this side and to this side. Are we doing okay? Alright. Now what do you do? The reason why you do this is, the reason why you add this to both sides, you're creating a left-hand side. The left-hand side now is a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so that is important for you to recognize, that x squared plus 10x plus 25, the paper is moving all over the place, but x squared plus 10x plus 25 is a perfect square trinomial. What does that mean? That means that it can be rewritten as a binomial square, and that's what you're going to do. You are going to rewrite the left hand side as binomial square. We're going to rewrite the left hand side as a binomial square. So step number 4 is, this is the key thing, you should be able to recognize which binomial square it is. So this is x squared, a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So that means a will be the square root of x squared, which is x. And because this is a plus sign, this is where it determines the sign. This is going to be plus and square root of 25 because this is b squared. So b will be 5 and it's a binomial square. So this is the same as this. You're just replacing a trinomial square with a binomial square. Perfect square trinomial with a binomial square. And your right hand side is, you just do your math. 25 minus 24 is 1. Now you're on known territory. What do you mean by known territory? You should be able to solve this. We just learned this method of isolating the square and taking square root on both sides. So step number 5, solve by square root method. Now you're on known territory. Remember, we just did isolating the square. Where you see a square, you can take square root on both sides. So my step number 5 will be, so square root of x plus 5 square will just become x plus 5. And remember, because you're square rooting a square, there's an x square on this side. This side will have to be plus or minus 1. Square root of 1 is 1. So it's plus or minus 1. So my final solution is x equals, 5 goes to the other side, because remember your goal is to get x by itself. So negative 5 plus or minus 1, I'll do one of them first, and then I'll do negative 5 minus 1. So my two solutions are x equals to -4 and x equals to -6, my two solutions, which is what I said. I said right in the beginning that that -6 and -4 were my solutions because I got that by factoring, and I'm doing this with completing the square method. Okay, so this is something that I did with writing down the steps. We'll do a second problem. We'll do a second problem without writing down the steps, but following the steps exactly as it is. So my second problem is, in my notes, is x squared plus 4x minus 1. There's no space for this, so I'm just going to do this on this piece of paper. So step number 1, follow the steps. Step number 1, move the constant to the other side. So I'm just going to follow the steps as I wrote it down. So my step number 1 is x squared plus 4x, move the constant to the other side, is equal to 1. Step number 2, take b, divide by 2 and square it. So basically b by 2, so this is my b by 2 squared equals 4 by 2 squared. 2 squared is 4. And what do we do this according to our steps? Add this to both the sides of the equation. So my equation was x squared plus 4x equals to 1. Add this 4 to both the sides. So x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 1 plus 4. I'm circling this so that we can see that the same 4 is being added to both the sides. Why did we do this? It also says left hand side now is a perfect square trinomial. So I'm looking at this and I see that my left hand side should be a perfect square trinomial, which means it can be rewritten as a binomial square. That's what it says here, rewritten as a binomial square. So step number 4, here it says rewrite as a left hand side as a binomial square. So what is a binomial of what square? So my first term will be x because this is x squared, so this will be x. It's a plus here, so this will also be a plus here. And this is 4. This is b squared, so my b will be square root of 4, which is 2, and then squared. Remember, this is going to be a binomial squared, and this is 5. Okay, now we are on known territory. Now you have to say step number 5, solve by the square root method, right? So my square root method is taking square root on both sides. So I have square and square root cancel each other, so just x plus 2 equals plus or minus, there's no square root of 5, so you just keep it as square root of 5, but you want to isolate the x, so you take the 2 to the other side, so my final answer is x equals -2 plus or minus square root of 5. And this is your final solution, and hopefully we have learned how to do the square root method.